Welcome back into the Lions 24/7 podcast. I am Tyler Donahue. Our second episode of this bye week. It'll be our final episode of this bye week. We will come back to you at the start of next week when Penn State's getting ready for that Kent State matchup back on home turf in Beaver Stadium, 3:30 p.m. kickoff on September 21st. But we'll still a ways away off from that next matchup, and we're going to take some time to discuss Penn State's efforts to self-improve during this bye week. What is James Franklin focused on both sides of the football? We've got some injury updates as well, and we got a pretty long look at the practice field on Tuesday evening. Saw some one-on-one competition, saw a bunch of positional work. We have a full practice notebook over at lions247.com, along with a photo gallery and complete video of James Franklin's post-practice press conference. Head over to lions247.com for the latest there. We're going to do our best to work through that conversation with Daniel Gallen in a moment. And then stick around with us for a bunch of recruiting feedback from Penn State's first home matchup of 2024. We know these home games, aside from what's going on in the field, there is some serious recruiting implications. There were several top prospects from within the region on campus on Saturday. Tyler Calvaruso will tell us what he's hearing coming out of those opportunities. And additionally, which Penn State commits across the country are off to outstanding starts on the high school field. We're going to break down some of that with Tyler Calvaruso later. But without further ado, here is Daniel Gallen, who was on the practice field with me on Tuesday evening. Then we spent some time hearing from James Franklin afterward. And Daniel, welcome back in. We got a bye week. Penn State's at 2-0, number 8 nationally. But when you're working your way off of a game like they experienced against Bowling Green, it's a good way to keep you on your toes during this week of lighter work.
Definitely. And I think Penn State went into this week with a little bit more on their plate than maybe they thought they would after these first 2 weeks. But you've got a couple ways to look at that. That can be a good thing. Clean some of these things up now so you don't have to worry about them later. And then the other side of the coin is, well, those players who might have thought they were in for a light week, the stakes got ramped up just a little bit more. But first of 2 bye weeks, weird, a little bit of a different schedule set up this year. But, I think right now it's probably a good thing for Penn State.
Yeah, it is strange to be at a bye week this early in the year. The next one will come around for Penn State right in the middle of the season, following that trip out to USC. That'll be game number 6 for Penn State. Then they'll come out of that second bye week and have a 6-game stretch in 6 weeks to finish off the regular season. Daniel, when we talk about the updates that we learned from the practice field on Tuesday, we've got to begin with confirmation that tight end Andrew Rapplier is dealing with a long-term injury. As we discussed in the last episode of the podcast Monday, this was the kind of news we were bracing for. Rapplier suffered a significant injury late last week as Penn State was preparing to play Bowling Green. They came to Beaver Stadium. He was on crutches. He was out for the game. He'll be out for a while. And Daniel, there's a lot of players you could have pointed to in preseason and said, this guy's an ascending figure. This guy's due for a breakout. We did a lot of that on the podcast in the month of August. Andrew Rapplier was consistently one of those guys we brought up as ready to take the next step. He started the first game alongside Tyler Warren, played about half the snaps as Warren did at West Virginia, but it was a step forward for him. And I think we would have seen a ton of number 87 this season. And I was really intrigued by what we might have seen. Instead, his developmental process is kind of on pause right now. He'll do what he can behind the scenes. But in terms of winning games right now for Penn State football, he's not going to be part of that equation until further notice.
Yeah, it's really tough for someone that we had high expectations for in the media. It seemed like the coaching staff had high expectations for inside the building. And I think based on our conversations with Rapplier this summer and early this season, he had pretty high expectations for himself and what he was going to accomplish. So it's a tough blow. I think on the individual level, that developmental clock just takes like another, step back. You reset, you wait. You see how you come out of the rehab. I know that he's coming from the New England prep school scene. He's already a little bit on the older side, I believe. And so, physically, maybe he can bounce back a little bit quicker. But, for Penn State, it's next man up. I know that you had the line of questioning earlier this month about how Andrew Rapplier benefited from the Khalil Dinkins absence in camp and earlier this season. And now it's, all right, who is going to, for lack of a better term, take advantage of this absence and use this opportunity to step up and assert yourself in that role behind Tyler Warren?
Yeah, I think the obvious initial answer for a lot of people right now is Luke Reynolds, because he did start game 2. He played 21 snaps after handling a dozen snaps in week 1. Wanted to follow up with James Franklin after practice yesterday. I did not get a chance to, but just to check in on that green light status for Luke Reynolds, because right now it seems inevitable that he's going to burn his red shirt based on what's happening at tight end and the way he's been utilized so far. But I think it's going to be a really interesting competition, Daniel, because Khalil Dinkins was back. I think he played about 8 snaps last week, just kind of getting back into the groove, getting that rust knocked off. Not only did he miss game 1 against West Virginia, he missed a bunch of August and live periods and contact periods. And so work to do and working his way back, but he's got a bye week now. He come out next week. He was number 2 in the drill lines that we saw on Tuesday evening at practice. It was Tyler Warren, of course, at the head of them, followed by Dinkins, then Luke Reynolds, then the rest of the crew like Jerry Cross and Joey Schlafer. But to me, Daniel, this is kind of where we're at with the tight end conversation. We know who the alpha is. Tyler Warren's not going to leave the field much. But in terms of number 2, and that might mean you're starting on a weekly basis, it's really going to be about this 4th-year guy in Khalil Dinkins, who's missed about a month of work, and now he's trying to reassert himself. And then the ascending figure, the former 5-star recruit who was the number 1 tight end nationally in our rankings at 24/7 Sports, has put on those 30 pounds since January, and his trajectory continues to point up. So I don't think that the cupboard is bare by any means, but you've kind of got to recalibrate who's going to be next up behind Tyler Warren and what it might mean for this offense.
Things definitely shifted a lot, and I think that's football, and that's why you build this sort of depth on the recruiting trail. That's why even if you look at a position and you think, oh, this looks pretty good for the next few years, you keep bringing guys in, you keep guys around, you try to do that retention. So that through the portal and whatnot, a position doesn't get shallow. And I think that we'll see what kind of. I think this will be a good test and for Ty Howell as a tight ends coach to see what he's done with Luke Reynolds to get him ready to play and ready to contribute. At this point in his career, I think the door is now open for guys that we have not seen much of, like Cross and Schlaffer, to potentially find their way onto the field in different situations. And I think most of all for Dinkins, this is a chances right there to show what you can do, be someone reliable. We've seen what he's been able to do in limited time before. So the sooner this bye week comes at probably the best time for him, as a lot of players on this team, where he got that little taste of action against Bowling Green. Now he gets a week to continue to build that up. And then you have Kent State, and maybe by Illinois, he's full go and ready.
They do think that Dinkins is a weapon. They love how far he's progressed since he got to campus several years ago. He's the son of a longtime NFL tight end. There's a lot working in his favor. What isn't is that absence, and we'll see how he works back in the next couple of weeks and how much he plays against Kent State. Sticking on the availability aspect here, a couple defenders were missing that we did not see involved to finish out the game last Saturday. KJ Winston, who in week 1 was the Big Ten Defensive Player of the Week for his first performance at West Virginia, exited the game early on Saturday against Bowling Green. You probably heard our coverage earlier, hopefully this week, and talking about him being on the sideline, but without a helmet. And so now not at practice. And then Tamir Robinson missed last week's matchup after exiting early at West Virginia. We've discussed how thin it seems to be in terms of depth at linebacker. He's one of those guys that we viewed as a solution, as a too deep component of that part, but thus far has not been able to get involved on defense, and we're waiting to see if he'll get involved on the practice field between now and next week. Any reaction to those 2 guys missing? I know we're going to see probably a conservative approach from Penn State in terms of guys during a bye week, getting them right, getting them healthy, but without Winston, without Tamir Robinson, these are 2 very different absences, but they could both sting in a major way for this defense moving forward if they're not able to return.
I think Winston is in that really wait and see category. Like, we'll have a more, I guess, definitive opinion next week when we get our look at practice. We saw him on the sideline after he left against Bowling Green. Looked to be in good spirits. I wasn't surprised that we didn't see him last night, given how they handle some of these injuries, and especially with what they do and do not show us in terms of injured players during our viewing window. And so we'll see next week. I do think that that's a big one to kind of monitor as we move forward, just because of who KJ Winston is, what he means, and how the shape of the defense changed after he left. in terms of Jalen Reed no longer playing that Lion spot and things going a little bit more towards base or sort of traditional nickel, and only playing Zachy Wheatley and Jalen Reed at safety. So I think that's something to keep in the back of your mind, and we'll see next week when Kent State gets closer. As for Robinson, I think that's another one that we'll see when he's back. But that linebacker depth, watching them go through drill work, I mean, we've talked about it before, but it is pretty shallow. I think that you want to see how quickly Dakari Nelson can get up to speed. We've heard good things about how he's taken to the position, and Anthony Specca, who we had a pretty nice conversation about last week ahead of Bowling Green. I think he's someone who comes into focus a little bit more as we go to a game where I think this time there will be the chance to empty the bench and give some of these younger and give some of the it's the bye week. No one's listening to this one. And get these guys more work and get them that seasoning. So we'll see. I just think that for Robinson, it's just really tough because we heard so many good things about him, and we'd seen how he developed physically, and I've been really intrigued by the idea of that frame playing in that Mike linebacker spot or really anywhere on that second level, and to delay that, we'll see. And I think also the fact that he was really active on special teams, that's a window into this is someone who's doing what the program is asking him to do, and doing the right things behind the scenes.
Not just active on special teams, but Robinson was selected as special teams player of the week in game one when he suffered that injury. Again, these are undisclosed injuries, unspecified injuries. If you haven't been following Penn State coverage for a while, that's the way it's going to be. We're not going to get a lot of particulars on medical setbacks, but we will bring you the latest when we learn it. That's what we've got right now. And James Franklin did say there's been more, quote, bumps and bruises this season than in recent seasons. I think he said going back to 2021 is probably the last time they've dealt with injuries in kind of this consistency. And so another test for the 2-0 Nittany Lions, and they'll have to react accordingly. One other note here, and this is about player availability, but in a different realm. Amin Vanover, who's been one of those top 4 defensive ends that they leaned on early this season. That's a spot where depth got thinner than we expected over the course of the offseason. But he was charged this week with a DUI related to marijuana use here in State College. It's a situation that obviously we're going to keep tabs on, but we don't know what the ramifications might mean on the field. Amin Vanover was at practice yesterday, and Amin Vanover played the last couple of games. This is an incident that, although he was charged this week, it occurred in August. And I think for as well as the Penn State coaching staff has its fingers on the pulse of everything that occurs regarding its players in this community, in this university, I can't imagine this was something they learned when we learned it here this week. So, Daniel, James Franklin, adamant that this isn't something he's going to discuss in a public setting. It came up during our media session. He said he's never discussed internal punishments before. And so I guess, again, we wait and see. Now that there's some formal charges, there's a legal process underway. Do we see Amin Vanover miss a game, miss a half? Something that we just have to keep tabs on. And if he does, then again, there's only 3 defensive ends that you can point to that have really played for Penn State. So this is something that we've got to keep tabs on.
Yeah, this is one of those things where kind of like how you laid out these coaches and staffers know what's going on with their players, and the fact that this happened when it did back in August. Like you said, I don't think this is something that would come as a surprise. So we'll see if we don't see certain. It's something that I think we talked about where usually the beginning of every season, there's guys that are absent for a couple games here and there with no real explanation. We haven't seen that this year, which is something notable, I think, in terms of the contributors. But yeah, I mean, if we don't see Amin Vanover or something during Kent State, I think that you can clock it. But I mean, that's a wait and see thing. James Franklin is, he just sticks to his word in terms of handling these things internally. I think that these players also know that this stuff is internal, the way that it's handled. When we talk to these guys, when they come back after some of these absences, there's, not a lot of insight put into things. And so, we'll wait and see. But I think that it is a reminder of, it makes you look a little bit closer at the defensive end depth chart. just putting that position in the spotlight, even though it's through this avenue. And it is a reminder that you've got an injury there and you've got another unexpected absence. And so, what does this look like moving forward? I don't want to jinx it again, but Kent State might be a good chance to see Max Granville, see Jordan Mayer even. That's the Wisconsin transfer who has been with the varsity group in practice during our looks. But again, we'll wait and see. I think that this stuff and the injuries, James Franklin has his way of handling it, and we kind of take what information we get when he does offer it.
Just one thing to get to from the practice field, aside from the 2,000 words that we posted in our notebook over at Lions 24/7 on Tuesday. I encourage all our VIP subscribers to check that one out. But Daniel, one thing that stood out to me was we saw the offense kind of separate into two groups. It was a different look at practice than we normally get. Normally it's ball security, ball disruption, a lot of positional work. It was a different setting here during the bye week, which we appreciated. Nice change of pace. And so we saw the varsity offensive players go toward one end of the field where James Franklin, Andy Kotelnicki were. The primary quarterbacks were down there, Drew Aller, Bo Prabula, Ethan Grunkemeyer. And then we saw, I guess what you would say maybe the JV squad at this point is probably the best way to just phrase it. On the other side of the field, they were working under the direction of offensive analyst Mark Dupuis. Over there, you saw quarterbacks like Jack Lambert. Jackson Smolik was with that group, and he's somebody who's working his way back from an injury, has been a lot more active lately. Josiah Brown was part of that JV group that I was discussing. Jerry Cross, Joey Schlafer at tight end were over there. But I just wanted to let people know who the receivers that went with the varsity kind of group were. It was kind of the usual suspects that we've seen: Harrison Wallace, Omari Evans. You've got Liam Clifford, Julian Fleming were in that initial lead group. And then the next group up featured some of those third-year wide receivers that we've put the spotlight on a bunch: Anthony Ivy, Tyler Johnson. And Johnson, by the way, has gotten into back-to-back games on offense after not seeing any game action through his first 2 years on campus. And then you had Caden Saunders in that group, who we are waiting to see make his debut on offense this year, just playing punt returner. But Tyseer Denmark, let's not forget, was part of that cluster of wide receivers working with the primary quarterbacks over there. So just something that I wanted to note here in terms of maybe how the offensive personnel and roster is kind of separating a little bit at this stage of the season through a couple matchups. Anything that you saw on the defensive field, which was you posted up, worth sharing here in the podcast?
I think that's a really good note on Tyseer Denmark because of how we saw that there's a pretty clear line through the first couple weeks of practice in terms of who those varsity guys were and who the D squad guys were. And I think Denmark is someone who we had circled as a potential riser over the course of the year. Someone who, depending on what would happen, the green light conversation could become interesting with him, depending on where he is. On the defensive side of the ball, I mentioned it earlier. You look at those linebackers and the depth really stands out to you. In terms of the availability that you have there. I watched some tackling drills. We know that that's something that James Franklin singled out as something that stood out to him from the Bowling Green game. You had Tom Allen and Anthony Poindexter and Dan Connor, coaching the linebackers and the safeties through some pretty technical tackling things. I know that sometimes in our heads, we don't think of all the tiny little mechanics that can go into making a tackle and then doing the proper technique. So that's always interesting for me to see up close. But I think that the defense, some of the absences out there stood out a little bit. I think that one thing that I thought was interesting was watching I wrote about this in the observations, but the defensive backs were doing drills where they were essentially sprinting all out downfield and tracking balls. And sometimes they had to run through a pad. Sometimes the pad was getting put in their line of sight. And I think that, over the course of a game, just because of how football is, you don't often get the chance to see guys really go all out and open that throttle. And so to see that, guys like Elliott Washington, just how smooth he is, and you can tell how powerful he is as a runner. Watching AJ Harris, you can just tell that he's a different level of athlete, which makes sense given he was a 5-star who went to Georgia initially. So I just thought that was a pretty good insight there. Overall, I thought practice was a little bit more subdued than what we'd heard for the past 2 weeks. I think that makes a little bit of sense given that it's the bye week. This is more, I think, about cleaning things up. I know that we know that the D squad gets a lot of work this week, and I think that once that gets going, the atmosphere probably changes a little bit. But just when we were in there, it felt very, it felt kind of like a classroom when it's the teacher says, "All right, I gave you this assignment, go work on it for a little bit, and then we'll come back at the end of class," and everyone, you talk to your classmates a little bit, or maybe exchange some notes, but mostly you're focused on what you're doing. And that's on the defensive side of the ball. That's sort of the atmosphere that I felt.
Just going back to what James Franklin said about that defense, he said tackling. He repeated this maybe 3 times. It was the biggest thing. And Antonio Rojas took a lot of ownership of that on himself. And then on the defense after the game, just catching up with him Saturday at Beaver Stadium, he said tackling's got to be a focal point for them during the bye week. But Franklin also a couple different times and in different answers referenced that there was a communication issue with the new technology that they're able to use. And Tom Allen getting to use that and doing that at home. He said specifically doing it at home when the Beaver Stadium crowd is trying to be loud on behalf of the defense. It sounds like there was some communication issues. And we saw James Franklin actually wearing a headset when we walked onto the practice field. I've never seen that. In 8 years covering this team's practices. I don't know if they're, going through some rehearsal type stuff, but wasn't necessarily pleased with the communication. And if you were watching that game, I think many of you were, you saw all the pre-snap kind of confusion in the first half for this defense. And it makes me wonder if these guys weren't getting the information from the sideline in a timely manner or in a clear manner where, middle linebacker Kobe King can disseminate that information across the field. You had defensive backs waving their arms looking for answers. You had defensive linemen trying to search for answers right as Bowling Green snapping the football. And you can kind of understand why it maybe turned into such a mess for that first half. But something to monitor there. James Franklin overall says he feels like Tom Allen's doing a very good job as their defensive coordinator. Really lauded his ability to be a relationship-based defensive coordinator. Says he's established very strong relationships across this roster. I think Penn State fans just want to see them go play 4 quarters of buttoned-up football against Kent State. That's the most important thing before entering that bye week. And then on offense, Daniel, James Franklin talked about the importance of picking up third downs. He says he feels like, an extra 6 to 10 plays in each half for Penn State can really provide them the balance they want. He said thus far, too many snaps on their defensive talent through 2 matchups and too few snaps for a lot of their offensive talent, too few opportunities for guys to make plays. He said a lot of what they've seen on offense is either they're scoring points in a hurry or they're going 3 and out. And so that's also an area of emphasis this week. It's going to be hard to marry. It always is hard to marry an explosive play offense with a sustained drive offense. And how does that work? And what are you willing to sacrifice to get the other part of it? I also wanted to reference, Daniel, just some snap counts that we did, kind of breaking things down during the bye week. Did a cumulative look at how much all the players on this roster have played so far, and also some of the top grades that have been given out by Pro Football Focus, which you can take with a grain of salt because that's one outlet's viewpoint of some of these player performances. But looking at the snaps, what I found very interesting was how far and away Tyler Warren is the most utilized skill player on offense outside of the quarterback spot. Tyler Warren, we knew he was going to be a mainstay, but right now, he's only behind Drew Shelton, your starting left tackle, Nick Dawkins, your starting center, Vega Ioane, your starting left guard, and your starting quarterback, and Drew Aller among offensive snaps for this group. He's far ahead of wide receivers. He's far ahead of the running backs, and I think that stands out in just how integral he's been for the offense. And then the other part for me is Abdul Carter currently ranks 13th when you look at Penn State's total snap counts on the season. They've been pretty balanced, I think, offense, defense. I think in the top 10, it was like 5 and 5. So pretty good sample size. Abdul Carter's down at 13, playing defensive end now. And I think that's notable, Daniel, because last year he played 580 total snaps. He played 50 more snaps than any other Nittany Lions defender. I think right now he's pacing 7th or 8th among Penn State defensive players. He took a big step forward, I thought, in terms of his impact in game 2. But that's something that you're going to have to balance a little bit if you're Penn State. You think the world of this guy. Think he can be maybe a top 10 pick in the NFL. But, is he involved like he was in the past for your defense? And how can you overcome that if he's not?
Yeah, I think where Carter fits in and what kind of impact you can really get out of him and how much he's going to be out there is interesting. in terms of the snap counts, when I was putting together the Penn State and the NFL roundup, I was going through and I always check the snap counts and put in how much a guy plays. And what you talked about with Tyler Warren in terms of where he is in relation to those offensive linemen and the quarterbacks, I always think that that's really notable because in the NFL, those are the guys that don't leave the field.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're looking, I think like Saquon Barkley might have played 81% of the snaps against Green Bay. And like, it was only the offensive lineman and Jalen Hurts were the guys who played more than him. And I think that that's a window into how valuable someone is to an offense, and also the level that they are as a player, where if you're good, so good that we can't take you off the field, that's how it's going to show up. And I think that the same thing holds true on the defensive side of the ball, because defensive end is a spot where you rotate a lot, even at the next level. And that's something that we've seen Penn State do. But I do think it is interesting now that you have this 2-game sample size to self-scout. I think that Abdul Carter is one of those areas that you would want to hone in on and figure out what's working. What we talked about before, he is being disruptive. I think we saw in that West Virginia game, the amount of attention he was getting and what that was doing to the rest of the defensive line was really good. But you put him there to get the quarterback on the ground. You put him there to be in the backfield, getting TFLs, getting sacks. So what can you do? What kind of things need to be done to unlock that? How can you utilize him? Because we know that he is a unique player with a very high level skill set. There's a reason he's getting first round buzz. So I think where this is right now, how can you use him? How can you get the most out of him? And if you're not playing him as many snaps as you were last year, how do you maximize those snaps? How do you raise that efficiency of him in that position? So I think that that's something that you really want to have rolling by the time you get to Big Ten play, because we talk about it. Big Ten, that's where you want your 5 stars, your 4 stars, your future first round draft picks to really, really show up and lift you. And Carter's got to be one of those guys.
Look, Daniel, we will keep tabs on all these snap counts on a weekly basis, but I encourage people to head over to Lions247.com, get a kind of a snapshot of where we're at this point of the season with our bye week breakdown, looking at some of those heavily involved players, some of the highly graded players through the first couple matchups. We're going to finish this segment before we talk about recruiting by looking at the former Penn State players who are now doing big things in the NFL. Daniel, each week you're going to have a roundup for us at Lions247.com on Tuesdays, recapping the weekend that was for former Nittany Lions. And of course, this was kickoff weekend in the NFL, an exciting weekend every year for anyone who follows football. Who were the stars from Penn State past on Sunday and last Thursday, especially because I should even throw in Friday night because that's when Saquon Barkley did his damage.
Yeah, I mean, you got to start with Saquon Barkley. I know that there is a ton of excitement about what he could do with the Eagles. I know that based on our board, even people who aren't Eagles fans and even some Giants fans were looking forward to what he could be as part of an offense like that, where you have Jalen Hurts, AJ Brown, Devontae Smith, Dallas Goedert, that offensive line that is so well regarded. And I think the early returns were pretty good. 24 carries, 109 yards, 2 touchdowns, 2 catches, 23 yards, and an 18-yard touchdown that might have looked a little familiar to some Penn State fans with a catch along the side of the end zone. So I thought it was pretty vintage Barkley, what you want to see from him, what you expect to see from him. And I'll say it's a lot of, I think, reason for excitement in Philadelphia. Then the other one that really stood out from the weekend, Micah Parsons. He's someone who, when Dallas gets around to doing his contract, I don't know where he is on the pecking order because they just finished things up with Dak. Parsons is going to be in line for a really, really nice deal. And I had the Cowboys Browns game on for much of Sunday just to see what he was doing. And he was all over the place. 4 tackles, 1 sack, 1 tackle for loss, 1 pass deflection that I think led to an interception, and 5 quarterback hits. He's just all over the place. It was vintage Parsons, I thought, and it just showed the type of disruptive player he is at that level. I mean, he's been so good since he's gotten into the league. 3 Pro Bowls, 3 top finishes for AP Defensive Player of the Year in 3 seasons. It's a pretty good start, and I think if he plays like how he did on Sunday, he'll finally break through on some of those things.
When it comes to the rookie class, pretty significant group that just entered the NFL back in the spring, and they're just getting started. We're going to keep tabs on them for years to come. But any early returns, early feedback on that group of newcomers to the NFL?
So you had 5 of the Penn State rookies make their debuts. Theo Johnson with the Giants, Chop Robinson with the Dolphins, Caden Wallace with the Patriots, Olu Fashanu with the Jets, and Hunter Norzad with the Chiefs. Fashanu and Norzad both played special teams only in their games. Chop made his debut on special teams. He was on the kick return team for the opening kickoff, which is a reminder that even if you're a first-round pick, once you get to the NFL, you go back to the bottom of the pecking order again. But he got some defensive snaps. But Theo Johnson, first career catch, an 18-yarder in the fourth quarter of a loss. And Caden Wallace got 18 snaps as an inline tight end. The Patriots really leaned on some 6-man offensive fronts, and he was the extra guy that they brought out every time. We know that he was in the mix for a starting job, couldn't take advantage of it. We know that Patriots offensive line really is a work in progress from what people are saying. But for Wallace to get up there, I think this past year, his rise, 3rd round pick, getting this type of run in his NFL debut, I think is pretty cool. I saw a couple clips of the Patriots run game on Twitter, and you see big number 70 out there and putting some guys in the dirt. So it was pretty cool to see. But we'll see how this changes over time. Like Curtis Jacobs with the Patriots wasn't inactive, but he's someone who changed teams at roster cuts. We'll see if like Kalen King can get elevated from a practice squad. Daquan Hardy, same boat. Adisa Isaac was inactive with a hamstring injury, but I think that this is an exciting rookie class who can have some roles with their current teams.
All right, you can check out the latest from Nittany Lions in the NFL from Daniel on a weekly basis. It's a Tuesday staple for us at Lions247.com. Daniel, we'll talk to you real soon. I hope you enjoy your weekend away from the press box. I know I will, and we'll regroup next week with another week of coverage for this podcast and at Lions247.com ahead of Game 3.
I'm attending a dreaded fall weekend with a bunch of Maryland alumni, so I'm sure at the wedding reception Saturday night, we'll have that Maryland UVA game on somebody's phone, keeping tabs on everything going on. But it's going to be fun to get a break at this time of year, and looking forward to what comes next.
All right, expect a lot of dancing from you at that reception. Enjoy yourself. See you, man.
Thanks, Tyler.
Let's get into the recruiting discussion as promised right now with Tyler Calvaruso, our resident recruiting insider at Lions247.com. Tyler, welcome back.
How does Daniel know so many people are getting married? I swear.
Daniel Gallen knows way too many. Daniel Gallen has more friends than anyone I've ever met. He's invited to a wedding every weekend. Good for him, but it sounds exhausting, the life he lives. I can't do it anymore. Tyler, last time we had you on, we were looking ahead to the home opener, referencing the opportunities that come with these matchups for Penn State on the recruiting trail. So right now we're going to look back, and we're going to talk about the feedback you and our 24/7 Sports recruiting coverage team have received from some top prospects who were in attendance. And you can take us through this list. I do want to get to a little bit of those early season commit standouts that are already in Penn State's recruiting class and doing big things on high school fields. But when it comes with the visitors list, where do you want to start and why?
It wasn't a huge recruiting weekend for Penn State. They hosted close to 90 guys, about more than 30 scholarship guys, some more notable than others. That kind of goes without saying with every weekend with the visitors list. Got to start with Matt Sieg for me. Top 24/7 in-state safety from Fort Cherry. He's back at Penn State for the Bowling Green game, and things continue to go really well with him there. He's one of those situations where the more he gets back to campus, the more comfortable he gets being around the staff. And look, he's high on that safeties board for Anthony Poindexter. So the more that he's around Poindexter, the rest of the staff, and obviously before a game, your time with the staff is more limited than it would be during the summer or a visit in another setting. The conversations you have are just a little bit more brief, but recruits still tend to make the most out of these visits. That's what Matt Sieg did over the weekend, catching up with the staff, getting a good look at Penn State's defense, specifically the safety play in Tom Allen's system for the second week in a row. And I think this one's trending pretty nicely from Penn State based on all of the feedback that we've received on his recruitment so far. Still looking elsewhere, still interested in West Virginia. Pittsburgh's going to get him on campus for a visit for the backyard brawl. Rutgers has done well. Wisconsin has done well. So is Penn State, though. I'm liking where the Nittany Lions are at here early on in the process. I don't think it's going to be, one of those recruitments that wraps up imminently. I feel that he still wants to get out and see other programs before getting to that point in his process. But Penn State has acquitted itself well here early on. I think they're one of his top choices for sure.
Sieg is a top 24/7 prospect. He's the number 12 safety in the country at a Fort Cherry High School here in Pennsylvania, back in Beaver Stadium. Another top 24/7 talent from that 2026 class. And out of Toms River, New Jersey, which is in, Phil Troutwine's old stomping grounds when he was an offensive line prospect coming out of high school. Donovan Catholic High School is where you'll find Kai Pritchard. He's the number 13 interior offensive lineman nationally. He's the number 2 player in the state of New Jersey. And he's one of 3 offensive linemen I'm going to throw your way here in one fell swoop because Tavion Branch made the trip back to campus. He's an in-state target in the 2026 cycle out of Riverside High School. And then looking a little more long-term, Max Hiller, who we've brought up more frequently here on the podcast. You're going to hear his name a bunch moving forward. Maybe the top offensive lineman in the entire region for the 2027 class. He's here in the state of Pennsylvania. He's wowed us on the Penn State camp circuit, and he was back in Beaver Stadium. So I've got a trio of offensive linemen for you on the table. Take it wherever you'd like.
So just starting with Pritchard, I've known him since he was a freshman at Donovan Catholic, and it was kind of quickly evident that he was going to be a P4 at that time, P5 guy one day. You could see the size, you could see the way he moved. He had the makings of it, and he has ascended to that point. And, you got the feeling in talking to him as an underclassman that if Penn State was going to offer at any point, Nittany Lions would be high on his list. That offer came in during the summer in August, and he gets to campus for this Bowling Green home opener game visit, and it went really well. Again, another opportunity for a guy who's been around early in his recruitment. He attended a junior day during the winter, so he's got that familiarity with Phil Troutwine and company. Just another chance to get back around them, keep building those relationships. Penn State's high in his list. Another guy who, I'm not expecting any sort of movement here anytime soon, but Penn State is doing well, trending in the right direction. More offers are going to come for Pritchard, I would anticipate. I think he's a really solid prospect, and his offer list is going to continue to grow. So we'll see where that takes him. Branch, let's talk about guys who keep getting back to campus, man. I mean, during the summer, he was a frequent visitor. We saw him a couple different times in June. He made it back for that last batch visit in July, where he worked with Phil Troutwine leading up, at the conclusion of his last batch visit, right before whiteout camp, worked with Phil Troutwine inside of Haluba Hall. That led to an offer from the Nittany Lions. One thing that has stood out regarding Branch from Penn State perspective is they always love it when a guy comes to campus, not just routinely, but comes to campus routinely to earn an offer to suit up for the Nittany Lions. Says a lot about the guy's headspace, says a lot about how much he truly wants to be part of the program. And we always say it with the in-state offers. They are not issued lightly. There's got to be something there. And the staff definitely sees something there with Branch, and Branch definitely sees something in the Penn State staff. He thinks Troutwine can develop him again to the next level. So I know it sounds really rosy here for Penn State coming out of the weekend with these guys we're talking about, but it just so happens Penn State's they're in a good spot with these guys that we've talked about so far. You ask anyone familiar with Branch's recruitment, Penn State is standing out as one of his top choices. It's an in-state option. He loves the culture of the program, and Penn State really likes Branch. He's a guy they would welcome into their class right now if he wanted to get on board. So things have moved pretty quickly there from the offer, getting Branch back to campus, and his standing in that 26 offensive line pecking order in the early going. And with Hiller, I don't want to continue beating a dead horse with him because I feel like the conversation it's kind of similar every time he comes up. But now we have a game visit to talk about with him, which is good because really, and you mentioned this to me when we were discussing it, leading up to Saturday. This is kind of his first game visit where he's entrenched as one of the top overall priorities in that 27 class. It was always kind of easy to see that Penn State liked Maxwell Hiller a lot and was going to prioritize him moving forward, but he's got that number 20 ranking overall nationally next to his name now. He's a number 3 tackle prospect in the 27 class. So he's not just a priority for Penn State at this point early in his recruitment. He's an elite level recruit in that 27 class. And this was his first visit with that stature. And as I mentioned, as a very clear top of the board target for Penn State. A lot of good ground covered by the staff. And I continue to like the Nittany Lions early in that process. But again, he's going to Ohio State later in the fall. He's going to look to get to Maryland later in the fall. Those are the 2 right now that he's kind of laser focused on. I would anticipate but at some point that list is going to grow as more schools continue to call. I think he's going to continue making his visits and learning all that he can about these programs, but he already knows plenty about Penn State, and he's liking what he knows.
If you can follow up picking up an elite tackle prospect in the 2026 cycle in your home state with Kevin Brown out of Harrisburg and get Max Hiller on board, I mean, that is a serious momentum driver for Phil Troutwine, and it seems like they've positioned themselves well early on. Let's finish with a couple more names who were in Beaver Stadium on Saturday, and they're both in that 2027 class as well, and they're both in the top 100 of 24/7 sports rankings for that group. So among high school sophomores nationally, we're talking about 3 of the top 100 guys were in Beaver Stadium on Saturday for this game. One of them, Khalil Taylor, out of the Pittsburgh area at wide receiver. The other, Miles McAfee, out of Archbishop Spalding High School down in the DMV. He is also a wide receiver. So it's a heck of a duo right there if you were able to envision them pairing down the road with Penn State. But can you talk us through them individually? McAfee out of Maryland, Taylor out of the state of Pennsylvania, and what they represent to Penn State long-term at the receiver spot?
Yeah, Taylor's been on Penn State's radar since his freshman year, last year at this point, and he got that offer in November. He was on campus for the Michigan game, got his offer from the Nittany Lions that day, and it was made pretty clear to him when he got his offer, look, you're going to be a priority for us moving forward in this 27 class. As early as it is, we like what you have going, and we're going to be, we want to keep you home. That's the end goal here. And that was a message that was really reiterated to him on Saturday. He actually got the chance to have a little bit of a meeting with James Franklin even before Penn State headed out on the field for pregame warmups. So those two got a good chance to catch up. And again, Franklin just hammered home, look, you're an in-state guy, you're top 100 talent, and you're one of the best. We think you could be one of the best players in the nation. And they want him at Penn State. That was reiterated to Taylor. He's going to be back in state college for the whiteout in November. That's the only other fall visit he has scheduled right now. Kind of like Hiller, I expect that to change. Game invites are going to be issued and guys are going to pop up in other places. But as of right now, that's the only other fall visit he has scheduled. So he will be back at Penn State again. Miles McAfee has done nothing but impress since he got to Archbishop Spalding down in Maryland, transferring over from St. John's College in D.C. And he popped on Penn State's radar just a little bit later than Taylor. He was visiting back during the spring. Then he goes out, dominates on the camp circuit, did it at Under Armour Baltimore in May. It did it at Elite Showcase Camp at Penn State in June. Got his offer. Big fan of Marcus Havigans and Mark Dupuy, the wide receiver duo. Dupuy in place as an offensive analyst. He's gotten to know McAfee quite well early in his recruitment from that camp experience, and those two, they gel well. Same deal with Havigans. McAfee really praised Havigans' coaching style coming away from his camp performance. He wanted to get back to Penn State for this visit, not only to see what a game day atmosphere inside of Beaver Stadium is like, and that blew him away. He had a ton of good things to say about what he experienced on that front, but really just to see Penn State's offense in action under Andy Kotelnicki. And one thing that stood out to him, this stood out to Matthew Gregory, who's another 27 in-state wideout from from Owen J. Roberts High in Pottstown. He got an offer from Penn State. Both of those guys praised Penn State's willingness to take shots downfield and be aggressive vertically and, give their receivers chances to make plays. The plays weren't always made, but the opportunities were drawn up, and Andy Kotelnicki was giving the wideouts opportunities. That's all those guys wanted to see, and mission accomplished on that front.
Tyler, there's a lot more that our listeners and subscribers can check out at Lions247.com coming out of this home game and the next 6 home games that are going to also represent recruiting opportunities and recruiting events. So by the time we resurface for game 3 against Kent State, there'll be a bunch of coverage brewing for who's going to be in Beaver Stadium for that matchup. Let's finish with some thoughts on Penn State's committed group. It's a big bunch, 25 guys on board in that 2025 class, working through their senior seasons right now. I tasked you with picking out a few from early on in the season that have really shined. What do you got for us?
You got to start in the backfield, really, with Jabri Wallace-Coleman, Tyke Hayes out, and Alec Quibb. But even Kamon Spell in the 27 class. That's why I said McKeesport. I was thinking about Spell there for some reason. But those 3, they're off to a really good start. I want to focus specifically on Wallace-Coleman and Hayes, as upperclassmen who are they're making waves, man. Hayes just etched his way to WPL history books. He's the 9th player in conference history or league history to across the 6,000 rushing yard mark, which, I mean, that's incredible. He's been doing it for Aliquippa as an underclassman, and he did it again on Friday night. Aliquippa's second game, first one got cut short due to weather. They dealt with another lightning delay on Friday night, but once they were on the field, Tyke has 3 touchdowns. He had a 60-plus yard run, I believe, a couple scores of 20 yards out. He was doing his thing. Jabri Wallace-Coleman, though, man, Imhotep found itself in a fight against Chester on Friday. They were down 18-7 coming out of the first quarter. Wallace-Coleman said, it's all good, guys. I got this. Ran for 229 yards, accounted for all of Imhotep's touchdowns, had 4 scores on the ground. He's off to big things in the beginning of his senior year. He's almost at the 500-yard mark already, 6 touchdowns. And then Spell. McKeesport is winless right now, but Spell's he had a couple of touchdowns against Thomas Jefferson over the weekend. Are really impressive runs. McKeesport's fallen just short in some of these games, but Spell has been an integral part of that offense. And then moving beyond the backfield, Kobe Howard is doing some good things out down in Florida, Chaminade Madonna. Jaden Woods had a strong season debut, their senior season debut out in Kansas. But, man, Alex Tash on defense. I know he's going to play linebacker at Penn State, but some of the things that he's doing on the ground for Greater Latrobe right now, ripped off 251 rushing yards, 4 scores. He's got that program at a level that they haven't really operated since the early 2000s. This is the first time Greater Latrobe has started 3-0 since 2005, and he's a huge reason. And then out on the West Coast, Darius Dixon. You're not going to see it if you go on Max Preps and you go look at Darius Dixon's profile and you go look at his stats. You're going to see a couple tackles. You're going to see an interception. You think, he's off to a nice start. Telling you, the numbers do not tell the story. He was integral in that first win against Corona Centennial with an interception that led to a modern-day scoring drive in the first quarter. Really got the ball rolling for the Monarchs in the right direction in that game. Remained locked down in coverage throughout the night. And then this past weekend against Bishop Gorman, everyone knows they're Vegas Power, National Power, one of the top programs on the West Coast. He's tasked with going up against 6'5" LSU wide receiver commit Derek Meadows, who is a 5-star prospect over at 24/7 Sports. He's a number 32 player in the nation. Dixon held ink when Dixon was tasked with covering him, 0 catches. Let me repeat, Derek Meadows is 6'5". Dixon's not that big. He's not even close to being that big. He does not have that kind of physical stature, and he was able to really have his way with him in coverage. So if you're looking for a Penn State commit to get really excited about, who maybe we haven't talked about quite as much with Dixon being a West Coast guy, I'm telling you, if you have the opportunity at any point to watch his tape or tune into a modern-day game or anything like that, check out some highlights. Dixon, he is out there working in coverage, and that's got to be music to Penn State's ears at this point.
Dixon really helped get that party started in the summer with that commitment spree early on. He jumped on board after a visit from the West Coast. And Tyler, let's finish here. You were on a high school football field this past weekend. You got a chance to see one of the region's top matchups, St. Joe's Prep and Erasmus Hall. That game did involve a Penn State commit and Cam Smith, the linebacker. It did involve some Penn State targets. Give us a quick summary of what you saw, what we need to know before we say goodbye.
Cam Smith, he had himself a night. Had a tackle for loss early, went on to block a punt on special teams that set up a rushing touchdown by Ohio State running back commit Isaiah West for St. Joe's Prep. For me, the athleticism, we've always seen that out of Smith. In the coverage ability, we've always seen that out of Smith. I think the biggest difference for me was I got the chance to see Smith last season as a junior after he just got to St. Joe's Prep, his first month with the program after starting his career in South Jersey. And he just looked a lot more comfortable in that St. Joe's Prep defense and a lot more comfortable at the level of competition. And I talked to the St. Joe's Prep staff about Smith, and they have nothing but good things to say about his development, his level of comfort in that defense at this point, his leadership ability as well. We'll have more with that on Lions 24/7 here pretty soon. Alex Haskell on the D-line for St. Joe's Prep, really strong kid, which shouldn't be any secret to our listenership. We've had plenty of praise for him on the physical development front. The first step has gotten better from when I saw him last year. Just a prospect trending upwards who is high on Penn State. Again, we're going to have more on him. And Lyric Samuel, Erasmus Hall's offense, it wasn't a good night. You got to call it what it was. St. Joe's Prep's defense did a really good job. Samuel caught 1 pass, charted him at 6 targets. Some of the throws, quite frankly, they just weren't there. The opportunities to hit him deep, they weren't there. They're looking for him. They tried, but he was getting separation. The balls just weren't there. And I think at the next level, I saw what I want to see out of Samuel when it comes to his ceiling, his ability to generate separation. That was something I was looking for, and he was doing that. But I think the fact of the matter is he's going to benefit at the next level from, playing as part of an improved offense with some improved quarterback play. So I think once he arrives in Happy Valley, we'll get a better idea of what Lyric Samuel is. But you see the potential every time you watch him work. You see it in the route running ability, the overall agility, catch radius. So yeah, encouraged on that front. But yeah, it was great to get out and see those three guys. A lot to like with all three.
Yeah, I shortchanged that. You saw 2 commitments in play. We appreciate you going there, checking that out, giving us the report. More at Lions247.com. Tyler will also be covering where Penn State coaches are on the road on the recruiting trail this weekend. There's no game to coach, but there are recruits to pursue. There are commitments to go spend time with. So you're going to see a lot of different Penn State presences on sidelines Friday night and into Saturday. And Tyler will have you covered on where this staff is heading and why they're heading there over the course of the next few days over at Lions247.com. Appreciate it, Mr. Calvaruso. We'll have you back on next week. We got another recruiting visitor list to get into before that Kent State matchup.
Yep, sounds good, man. Looking forward to it.
Good stuff from Tyler Calvaruso. Before him, you heard from our other colleague, Daniel Gallen. Lions247.com is where you can find the latest on Penn State notes. And when it comes to recruiting, it's going to be a lot in the next few days because Tyler has a bit of a notebook to empty out from what he saw last weekend, what he heard from a lot of those players. And we'll continue to pop up stories during this bye week regarding the football program. But we're back in full go mode. Next Monday, we'll be in James Franklin's press conference in Beaver Stadium. We'll have full practice coverage coming for you midweek. We'll have a bunch of player conversations, assistant coach conversations, and we'll have a few different podcasts here as we get set for Game 3. Until then, stepping aside for a few days, we're going into bye week mode. This is our only other episode of the podcast this week. If you missed our Monday episode, we spent a lot of time breaking down what went down in the Bowling Green matchup and what is going to need to be accomplished for the Nittany Lions during this time away from game action. For now, stepping aside, I'm Tyler Donahue. This has been the Lions 24/7 podcast.